Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in August. That is a lie. In August, I actually managed to read 15 books, which is a step up from what I managed in July and much more kind of my standard level, so I'm quite happy with that. But because of that, I am going to split my wrap up into two parts. This one's going to be more of the YA books. I have actually been avoiding reading much YA this year. However, this month I read mostly YA, which is a little bit strange. Oh, and there's a middle grade in here as well. So I'll do those ones in this video, and then I'll do another separate video where I talk about the more adult books that I read. As well, I am going to do this book battle style like I normally do, which means I pair up all the books, I battle them against each other until we find the champion of the month. This video will just decide what the best YA book is, and then in the next video I'll put it up against the adult champion, and we'll see YA versus adult, which one wins. I know which one I would expect to win, but we'll see if I'm right. So let's get into talking about all the books. I will leave timestamps down below if you want to jump to a particular section. So I've got a few graphic novels of different demographics to begin with. Got a science fiction, a mystery thriller, and then a bunch of fantasies. So our first preliminary round is going to be between Boy Crazy Stacy by Gail Galligan and Karen's Worst Day by Katie Farina. So both of these books are Babysitter's Club graphic novel adaptations. The Babysitter's Club books were my favorite books when I was a kid, and then recently they've been doing adaptations of them in these modern day graphic styles. Boy Crazy Stacy is the 8th book in the original series, but a slightly different number in this series, I forget. But basically, two of our babysitters, Marianne, who's very studious and introverted, and then Stacy, who's very outgoing and fashion conscious. They go off to Sea City with this family of like 8 kids, and they help to babysit. While they're there, Stacy falls for this lifeguard and kind of is a bit of a dick about it, shirks some of her responsibilities, but eventually, of course, learns a valuable lesson. So for me, the story was just really nostalgic. If you've read the Babysitter's Club books, I think you will enjoy the graphic novel versions. The only thing I would say is I do feel like this particular story, at least, wasn't as fully developed as the one in the original book. You just don't get to see as much of Stacy's thoughts. You don't really get to see how this lifeguard is leading her on. You don't even get as much, I don't think, of like what's happening with Marianne and the other boy babysitters that she meets up with. And I think you get less just in general of the children's antics. And I mean, that makes sense because instead of it being like a 200-page book, I mean, they're middle grade books, so they've got quite big fonts, but still, like instead of being a book, you've just got a very small amount of dialogue to tell the story in. And given that, I think it was a good adaptation, but it did kind of make me want to reread the original again. How many times have I read that? Too many. I don't need to read it again. But overall, I did really enjoy it. The other one I read is Karen's Worst Day. So this is part of the Babysitter's Club Little Sisters series. So basically, Karen is one of the babysitter's little sister, and she's very imaginative and very over the top. In this particular book, she basically has a bad day, but it's a whole bunch of like little things that just kind of mount up into being very frustrating, which I think we can all relate to having those kind of days where even you can tell sometimes that you're overreacting to things, but still, it's not a nice experience. So it was very relatable. I also think it woven quite a good lesson. Different people in Karen's family talked about what they do when they're having a bad day. The family took like some very small steps to cheer her up, and they like really acknowledged that she was having a bad day, while also still not really excusing her for some of the things that she did in reaction to that. So I think it was a really good little, quite a younger middle grade kind of story. The pictures are super cute, so I definitely think a younger child would enjoy reading this and would also be able to learn something from it. So I don't think that I've read the original of this particular book, but I did really enjoy this one as well. And in fact, I think if I battle these two books up against each other, I am going to go with Karen's Worst Day, just because I felt like the story was much more relatable. I thought the lessons were better, and it was just kind of cute and fun. So with that decided, we'll move into round 1, and we will put Karen's Worst Day up against Bee and Puppycat Volume 3 by Natasha Allegri, or at least edited by Natasha Allegri, because this is like a graphic novel short story anthology. There are a bunch of little short stories all about Bee and Puppycat, who are magical temps, and they go on these different temp jobs where they solve things in magical ways. They get sent off to different dimensions. Also, Bee is just incredibly lazy and struggles with life and motivation. She's very relatable, and her puppycat pet is kind of a little shit, but I really enjoy them. The only thing I will say is because each short story is kind of drawn and written by a different person, it's not that consistent. And I have to say, I read this at the start of the month, and at this point, I don't think I really remember many of the stories properly. So that's a sign that it didn't really stick with me. And I do think that of all of these, Volume 1 was, in fact, my favorite. And Volume 3 was fine. It was super cute, but it wasn't a favorite. So if I'm putting this up against Karen's Worst Day, I'm sure you won't be surprised for me to say that Karen's Worst Day was one that I enjoyed a lot more, and so I'm going to put that through to the next round. I'm trying to decide if that's the semi-finals. I haven't planned this properly. We'll see when we get there. Alright, then our next battle is going to be between Vortex by S.J. Kincaid and The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. So firstly, Vortex. This is the second book in a YA dystopian series where the world is at war, but because we don't want to disrupt people's everyday lives and like their consumerism, we're having the war out in space. And the spaceships that are fighting out in war are controlled by humans who have chips in their head. It's only teenagers that can deal or adapt to having these chips in their heads, so it's teenagers who are fighting this world war. I do really appreciate that the setup for this really explains why it's teenagers that are involved in the conflict, whereas a lot of YA dystopians don't entirely explain that or don't entirely make sense why there wouldn't be more adults involved. And there are adults in the story as well. So we're following our main character, Tom? I'm not sure if that's his name, but he is at the school learning how to pilot these drones and spaceships out in space with his mind. Also, because they've got these chips in their mind, they're actually able to have their perception altered, and in fact they learn programming so that they can protect themselves, but they also infect each other with viruses at different times. There's one part where there's like this goblin virus that they keep infecting with each other with, where they keep seeing goblins running around. So the first half of the book was a lot of fun. To be honest, fun isn't what I wanted from this book, so I was a little bit bored. Also, a lot of the characters are teenage boys, and I'm not a fan of teenage boys lately, or at least not a fan of reading from their perspective. So the beginning was not the best start for me. However, when it got more into the fact that these corporations are running the war and it's really in the best interest of the corporations to keep the war going, and there's all this corruption going on, a lot more secrets and twists got revealed, that part was a lot more interesting to me. We also got quite a lot of action at the end, and the story also has like a really strong theme of friendship, which I thought again also came out really strongly at the end of the story. So while the beginning wasn't the strongest start for me, by the end I was very into the story, and I'm very excited to read the next book in the series, which is the final and third book. I'm really hoping we can take down the corporations and end the war. Then the other book in this battle is The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is kind of a continuation of the Truly Devious series. We've got this girl named Stevie who really wants to be a detective. In the original Truly Devious series, she solved this murder mystery that was at this boarding school that she went to. In this one, it's kind of a separate story. However, I think if you haven't read the original trilogy, you'll be missing a lot of context and relationship background with Stevie, and so I wouldn't recommend reading it on its own, even though technically you could. But in this one, Stevie is going to this summer camp where back in the 70s, I think, there was a murder, and she's been brought along by this man to try and help solve that murder. And I have to say, I was just super engaged through this whole story. I love Stevie and her friend group. I love the humor. I love Stevie's anxiety and the way that's represented. I felt very involved in the mystery and trying to figure out all the different clues. The only thing that I would probably complain about is that I always hate it when the point of view character, so the character whose thoughts you're kind of following along with, like it's written in the third person, but you're hearing all their thoughts. I really hate it when a story is told in that way, but then you find out something that the point of view character knew, but they didn't tell you. I hate that. I hate when a plot reveal is revealed in that way. Like, if the main character knew, they should tell us, the reader. We're following along with them. Why would they keep secrets from us? It makes no sense. However, in this particular circumstance, I am willing to overlook it because I still just really enjoyed the story. There was just one bit where I was a little bit confused because I was like, But if you knew that, why wouldn't you tell us? Anyway, I'm over that, but I did really enjoy Box in the Woods, and I think if you like the Truly Devious series, you will definitely enjoy this continuation. Also, I'll explicitly mention this is a kind of a standalone mystery. I was a bit worried that it wasn't going to wrap up within this one book, but it does. Thank goodness we don't have to wait for another book to find out the answer to the mystery. So if I'm putting these two books up against each other, I was definitely more engaged throughout the whole story in The Box in the Woods compared to Vortex, where it only really got me engaged at the end of the story. I would also say that both of them had quite a lot of action at the end. In fact, The Box in the Woods had quite a lot of action the whole way through. It was just very fast paced. So I think really there's no way I couldn't put The Box in the Woods through to the next round. Okay, then for our next battle, we've got Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater up against King of Stars by Leigh Bardugo. Mr. Impossible is the second book in the Dreamers trilogy. This is a spin-off from the original Raven cycle. Primarily we're following Ronan and his family, as well as these other people that are also involved in the same kind of magical world that Ronan has gotten involved in. In the very beginning of this one as well, I was a little bit unsure how I was feeling about it. However, then it started getting more into it and I became very engaged. The ending was very satisfying and made me want to go back and reread the whole trilogy, and I'm really excited to find out what's going to happen in that final book now. As well, there are so many characters introduced in this series that I just really love. I would say Ronan and Hennessy are the ones who are out there learning about the magic, and I'm less interested in that part of the journey. But we also have Ronan's family and also Jordan and Carmen and Liliana, and they're just trying to live their lives to a large degree, but the influence of this magic on their life is really amazing. Just the way that Maggie Stiefvater has thought about things kind of blows my mind, and the way that she writes is so different from anyone else that I've really read. And I know for that reason that it probably isn't going to be to everyone's taste, but there were some parts that just blew my mind. I love them. Some of the concepts are amazing, and I'm definitely going to be rereading the series again at some point in the future. Then we also have King of Stars. So this is a duology in the same Grishaverse world that you've got the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Crooked Kingdom duology. We're following Nikolai and Nina. However, their two storylines are actually very disconnected. They may be happening at the same time, but I still personally think that these should have just been written as two separate books. Now, it's possible when I read the sequel Rule of Wolves that I will change my mind if it manages to connect them up, but I still think, given that those two stories didn't connect up at all in this book, it really made no sense to have them together. And in fact, I think each plot line just slowed down the other one, because every time something interesting would start happening in one, you would jump off to the other one and you'd think, ugh. And then you start getting into the next one and jump off to the first one again. And it's like, oh my goodness, I want to know what's happening with this one. And overall, I just think because of that, the pace of both plot lines was slowed down and nothing much happened, or at least things weren't progressed as much as I would have liked to have seen them progressed. The main reason I picked this book up was because I thought some really cool stuff might happen with Nina's magic. It didn't really. There was some other stuff that happened in the other plotline with Zoya's magic that I thought was pretty cool, but again, we didn't get much of that either. So overall, this story just kind of left me feeling pretty dissatisfied. So if I'm putting these two books up against each other, I feel like it's pretty obvious that I'm going to put Mr. Impossible through to the next round. Okay, then for our last battle in round one, we've got Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko up against Sisters of the Snake by Sasha and Serena Nanua. So firstly, Raybearer, I have seen this very hyped and I didn't really believe it, but I should have. We're basically following this young girl who doesn't really understand what's going on, but she gets put forward to try and become part of this emperor's... Oh my goodness, I struggle with this every time. He's like a prince. Is the prince of an emperor a prince? I think he's a prince. He's a prince, right? Anyway, let's call him a prince. So the prince has to choose 12 children to be part of his council, each one coming from a different area of his kingdom, and this girl has been sent forward to it. Each one of these children has like a different magical gift, and as well, when they form this bond with the prince, he gains a different kind of immunity to a different kind of death. So once he has his council formed, he's essentially unkillable. So I thought that whole magical concept was pretty cool, and all the different kinds of magical abilities that people had were really interesting, and the way that they fed into the plot and like impacted the way that the plot went was really well thought through. Also, we just learned so much more about the world as we go. So many characters, you think you know what their motivations are, and then it's actually something else. You think you understand what's going on, and then you actually don't. I really liked the romance in this, which I don't normally like romances, but this one, kind of romance I can get behind, and the angst that was introduced actually felt like it had some foundation rather than just kind of being miscommunication, overreaction type stuff. And then right at the end it set up a really interesting challenge for the next book, so I'm really interested to see where the story is going to go. Also, I think it's just a duology, so the next book will wrap everything up, which is exciting. And as well, I think it's just been released, so I need to get my hands on it. My library doesn't have it yet. But hopefully soon. Then we've got Sisters of the Snake. This one, to be honest, I was kind of disappointed in it. It is a story about twins written by twins, which I was excited about to see like a twins perspective of twins. But what I should have expected from the synopsis is that they don't really spend that much time together, and because they weren't raised together, they don't really even know each other. So it didn't really get me that twin experience that I was looking for. Basically, we've got this street urchin and a princess, and they discover they look the same, and they just agree to change places. But from there, it went in a pretty predictable direction. As well, it just was a bit of a stretch of the imagination to believe they could even get away with it, because they did absolutely no planning. They knew nothing about each other's lives. It was just kind of a disaster. As well, I really wanted some more of the mythology and the magic. It seemed like some of that could be really interesting, but it was more just kind of focused on the different girls trying to find their place in life, trying to do something meaningful, you know, dealing with the fact that they've been taken away from their family at a young age. And while that's fine, it's not the kind of story that I really enjoy. So I feel like a lot of people would enjoy this, but it's not for me, and I find it really hard to say that without sounding like I don't really mean it. But I just don't think it was for me. One good thing I would say is that there is a snake familiar, and I did really enjoy her and her humor and just her sarcasm. She was great. So I think, again, this battle is very obvious. If I'm putting these two books up against each other, I'm definitely going to put Raybearer through to the next round. Okay, I've done some calculations, and I think we must now be up to the semi-finals. So firstly, I'm going to put Karen's Worst Day by Serena up against The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This doesn't really seem like a fair battle, because Karen's Worst Day, while very fun and relatable and cute, was just really short, and there really wasn't that much to it. On the other hand, The Box in the Woods had this full mystery in it, and even right near the end I was thinking, how is this possibly going to get wrapped up in this one book? There's so many different clues going on, but somehow it managed to do it in a really satisfying way. So I'm definitely going to put The Box in the Woods through to the finals. Then we have Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater up against Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, and this is a much harder battle. Things get hard from here. Mr. Impossible did have a shaky start, but in the end there were a lot of really amazing things included in it, and some characters who I really loved. There were characters that I loved in Raybearer, but also in this Council of 12, I do feel like we didn't get to know as many of them as I would have liked to have gotten to know. And as well, like Mr. Impossible had a little bit at the beginning where I was a little bit uncertain, there were parts in Raybearer where I did feel like things went on a little bit long for my preference. I think other people might not be bothered by it, but there were parts where I was like, okay. And I was glad that I was listening to it on audiobook so I could just kind of, you know, wait for it to get through those bits. There weren't too many of those, but there were a couple of little bits like that. And while I did really like the magic system and what's going on in Raybearer, and I liked the reveals, I don't think they were quite as mind-blowing as the reveals in Mr. Impossible. So I think I'm going to put Mr. Impossible through to the finals. And that means that our final is going to be between The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson and Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater. This is another hard one. I would say that I really enjoyed my whole experience of reading The Box in the Woods, and I really enjoyed the characters in the story, and they felt very real and human. But also in Mr. Impossible, even though it was shaky in the beginning, I eventually did get into it, and the characters also feel very real while also having this very amazing magical component impacting their lives. It was really weird and really strange and really stretched my mind and really made me think about things in different ways. And I think even though I like the characters in The Box in the Woods, there's definitely characters in Mr. Impossible and the Dreamers trilogy that I love. Not just like, but I love them. So I think for that reason, I'm going to pick as the best YA book that I read in August, I'm going to pick Mr. Impossible. I really hope we don't have to wait very long for the next book in that series. And if you haven't read it yet, but you'd like to call down the hawk, then really you need to hurry up. So hopefully soon I will have my adult part of this wrap up, and then you can see what the actual champion of the month was. But regardless, do let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video, because I would love to talk with you more about them down in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.